There are renewed calls for tougher regulations on AI companies after OpenAI confirmed employees had flagged the account belonging to the Tumbler Ridge school shooter. Following posts about gun violence, 8 people were killed in the shooting, including 6 children. OpenAI banned the shooter's account but did not report the incident to law enforcement. Jennifer Raso is among those calling for tougher rules around AI. She is a law professor at MGill University and joins me now. Hi, Jennifer.
Hi there.
So OpenAI has said it did not report the account to law enforcement because, in their view, it did not represent an imminent threat. Now, obviously, that proved to be incorrect. But I guess the question is, what could the government have done beforehand to make sure that something like this didn't happen then? And what could they do now to make sure it doesn't happen in the future?
Yeah, so I think that, there are a lot of questions about what happened in Tumbler Ridge. Not just in terms of what was going on behind the scenes at OpenAI, but also actions the government could take, as you've noted. So there's been, moves federally to regulate AI, but not much actually, practically speaking, that's happened in terms of regulations coming into effect. And this is all happening at the time when it's clear that chatbots like OpenAI's ChatGPT are having devastating consequences.
What do you think a good regulation would actually look like? Are we talking about the government requiring AI companies to report? And then I guess where do you set that threshold to make sure that it's not just an information tube straight from the chatbot to the government? There's a needle to be thread there.
Right.
What kind of regulations would you like to see?
So I think that, the duty to report is, it's complicated. I think that it's important for there to be some sort of duty on the part of firms like OpenAI to report the conduct of users, as would be the case if you had somebody who was a mental health care practitioner who had a client who was suggesting that they were going to cause violence to somebody else. However, I think that looking at that kind of endpoint is a bit too late in terms of thinking about where regulators ought to be focusing their attention. So they really should be thinking about earlier in the conversation in terms of what ought to be allowed or not.
I do think it's quite complicated, though, because part of the problem with the AI technology is that if you talk to some of the people who are actually creating this stuff, they're not even sure 100% how it works and why it does the things it does. And so you've seen these situations where AI chatbots are reinforcing almost whatever it is that the person who's interacting with it is asking of it. It's led to mental health crises that have resulted in people taking their own lives.
So I think that this is a common statement made by those working within AI companies, that they don't know how their tools operate, that everything seems like magic to them. However, in firms like OpenAI, there have been calls even within their own safety teams to address some of the most harmful outputs of these tools. And I would say that it's actually, I think, a bit of misinformation about what it has been known within firms like OpenAI in terms of the effects that their tools have been having on people and the types of messages or conversations that they've been engaged in. It's been at least a couple of years now that there's been calls from inside the house, so to speak, about some of the dangerous consequences of these tools. And so I would say that if that's the case, then we need to be acting accordingly.
Very, very quickly before I let you go, I just want to ask your sort of assessment of how the AI minister, Evan Solomon, has handled this case. He called the company to Ottawa, said he was quite disappointed that there weren't concrete solutions presented by the company. Your reaction to his, or your response to his handling of this situation?
Yeah, so, I think it's a bit too little too late when it comes to calling a firm to Ottawa after one of, the most horrific mass shootings in the history of our country has happened, and where OpenAI has, been in the mix in terms of its tool being involved in communicating with the shooter. I think that OpenAI, shortly after that meeting, they released a letter indicating different things that they were going to do when it comes to self-regulating in the future and reporting similar types of conversations. But to me, this is all a bit of, a PR for the firm. And if anything, it maybe deflates the balloon that's been growing in terms of calls to regulate OpenAI. And so I think that if anything, the events of the last week are a wake-up call for Canadians that suggest we need stronger AI regulations, federally, even provincially, and we need them now.
All right, Jennifer Raso, McGill University law professor, thanks very much. Appreciate this.
Thanks so much.